My name is Amber Colston. I'm 34. I work nights in the EQ at a hospital 40 minutes from the town I grew up in, and at 6:30 in the morning, still in my scrubs from a shift that hadn't technically ended, my phone rang with my sister's name on it. I answered on speaker because my hands were full of a coffee I hadn't earned yet. "Dad's gone," Renee said, cold, flat, the way you'd read a number off a chart. "He passed in his sleep last night, funeral Sunday, and before you ask, no, there's nothing for you. He changed the will. You're cut off, Amber. It's done." I heard a laugh in the background, low and satisfied, a man's laugh. "Grant's laugh, finally," he said, not quite far enough from the phone. "She's out. I want you to understand something about me before I go any further. I am a nurse. I have called codes. I have held the hand of a stranger while the monitor went flat and stayed flat, and I have learned to keep my voice level when the whole room wants to fall apart. So when my sister told me our father was dead and I was cut off in the same breath, comma, not period, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did the thing I always do. I checked the vitals of the situation, and the vitals didn't match the diagnosis. Because sitting 3 feet from my sister, in a recliner with a coffee mug in his hand, close enough that I heard the particular creak his knees made when he leaned toward a phone, was my father. Alive. Listening to every word of it. He leaned in, and just before Renee hung up on me, I heard him say something too quiet for her to catch, something meant only for me, 4 words that I muted in my own chest and carried around for 3 weeks like a coal in my pocket. You'll hear it soon. 3 weeks later, I did hear it, in a room with 60 folding chairs, a closed casket that had never held anybody, and my sister in a black dress with the tags freshly cut off. And it was so much worse than I had imagined, because by then I understood that the funeral wasn't for my father at all. It was for the version of our family I'd spent my whole life trying to keep alive. If you're new here, welcome. I tell stories like this most weeks, the ones people don't usually say out loud, and if you've ever had a family member decide you're worth for you, stay with me. This one's a long ride, but I promise you it lands somewhere worth arriving. I have to take you back to understand any of it, because a call like that doesn't come out of nowhere. Nothing in my family ever did. Everything had a foundation poured months, sometimes years, before you saw the walls go up. 6 months before that phone call, my father was 71 years old, and by every measure that mattered, he was fine. Moses Colston, born in 1955, 2 tours in the Navy before I existed, 31 years running a small vac company out of a 2-bay garage he built with his own hands. Paid off that garage, paid off the house, paid off, as he liked to say, everything a bank ever tried to rent me. He wasn't rich. He was paid off rich, which in my hometown is its own kind of quiet royalty, the kind where nobody can take anything from you because there's nothing left owed. My mother died when I was 26. Ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. My father grieved her the way he did everything, quietly, daily, without asking anyone to watch. He kept her rain boots by the back door for 4 years after. He wound her clock on the mantel every Sunday morning at the same time she used to, because somebody had to, and he wasn't going to let a good clock go silent just because the house had gotten quieter. I moved 40 minutes away for a job I loved and never quite made it back as often as I meant to. But we had Sunday calls, every week, 7 p.m., no matter what. He'd tell me what he fixed that week. A fence, a faucet, once memorably a neighbor's riding mower he wasn't even asked to fix. He just saw it broken in the yard and couldn't stand it. I'd tell him about my patients, careful with the details, the way you learn to be careful when you love someone who worries. My sister Renee stayed in town. She's 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she wore the one who stayed, like a medal she'd been issued rather than a choice she kept making. At the time, I thought that was fair. I thought distance was my debt and staying was hers, and we were even. It took me the better part of a year to understand that staying wasn't a sacrifice for Renee. It was a position, and positions, once you're in the family long enough, come with access. Renee married Grant 4 years ago. Grant sells mortgages, or he did, or he says he does. With Grant, the tense was always a little slippery. He has a handshake he practices, a voice like warm syrup poured slow on purpose, and a way of talking about people's houses like they were line items. The first time I met him, at Thanksgiving, he stood in my father's kitchen, ran his hand along the counter like he was appraising it, and said, "This is a beautiful piece of real estate, Moses. Paid off, no less. That's rare air these days." At the time it sounded like a compliment. It took me the better part of a year to hear it for what it actually was. A man quietly filing my father's house under assets. The accident happened in March. My father was up on a ladder clearing gutters he'd been clearing himself for 40 years, and his foot slipped on a rung slick with wet leaves. He came down hard on his hip. Not catastrophic, no surgery, thank God, but a bad fracture that needed 6 to 8 weeks of careful recovery, physical therapy twice a week, and somebody checking on him daily. I took 2 days off and drove down that same night. By the time I got to the hospital, Renee was already in the waiting room, mascara arranged in tracks that looked less like crying and more like a decision. Grant was in the hallway, shaking the orthopedic surgeon's hand with both of his, like he was closing on a duplex. "Family takes care of family," Grant told the doctor, loud enough for the whole hallway to hear it, loud enough that I understood immediately it wasn't a sentence meant for the doctor at all. I asked to see the discharge paperwork, the medication list, the follow-up schedule. Renee took the folder out of my hands before I'd finished the sentence. "It's all handled, Amber," she said in the voice you'd use on someone slightly slow. "You don't need to worry about it. I've got him." My father, still fogged from the anesthesia, patted my hand and told me to get back to my patients, that he'd be fine, that Renee had it covered. "I want to be honest with you about something because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because the two people standing closest to my father kept telling me in overlapping voices that everything was handled. I have learned since then that 'it's handled' is one of the most dangerous sentences in the English language, right up there with 'trust me,' and you don't need to see that. The plan, they said, was for Dad to stay with Renee and Grant for a few weeks while his hip healed, since their house had a downstairs bedroom and mine didn't. It sounded reasonable. It sounded, God help me, kind. The first document appeared about 10 days in, a limited power of attorney just for bill paying, just so Renee could handle the mortgage-free house's utilities while Dad couldn't drive to the bank. He signed it left-handed, since his right shoulder was still stiff from the fall, and the signature came out a little shaky but recognizably his. It was legal. It was reasonable. It was, frankly, boring. Your own mother would have signed one. That's the trap of the boring document. Nobody guards against boring. A week after that, Renee posted a photo of Dad at her kitchen table, a blanket over his lap, a cup of coffee in front of him, captioned, "Blessed to be able to care for my daddy in his time of need. Family first always." I noticed, though I didn't say anything yet, that in the photo his eyes didn't quite reach the camera. I called every few days. More and more, it was Renee who answered his cell. "He's napping, hun. He's real tired today." I sent him a tablet so we could video chat. The tracking said it was delivered to their address. When I asked about it 2 weeks later, Renee said he didn't want it, said it hurt his eyes. I sent a second one, cheaper, simpler with the volume preset, same story. Grant, meanwhile, had started referring to the house on Larkspur Lane, my father's house, paid off, 41 years of memory in the walls, as the asset. Once at dinner, unironically, mid-bite, once the asset's rented out, that's real passive income for whoever's holding it. Nobody at the table corrected the word. I sat there running triage in my head on a sentence, trying to figure out what kind of wound it was. At Christmas, I drove down and found my father's usual chair. The recliner by the window, the one that had been his for 30 years, had been quietly relocated to a corner near the coat closet, and a spare folding chair had taken its place near the outlet where Grant liked to charge his phone. Dad was thinner, quieter. He wore a cardigan I didn't recognize. He got me alone for maybe 90 seconds, out by the garage, under the excuse of showing me a tool he didn't need showing. "My checkbook's been on a diet," he said, low, almost amused, the way he joked about things that scared him. Statements used to come to the house. "Now I don't know where they go." I asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether he'd seen a bank statement lately. Grant appeared in the doorway before I'd finished the question, smile wide, voice smooth as a car salesman's. "Family doesn't need lawyers, Amber, unless somebody's accusing somebody." Renee on cue dabbed at dry eyes and said something about how nobody appreciated the person who actually stayed and did the work. My father, because he is a decent man, and decent men make the softest hostages, squeezed my arm and said, "Don't start a war at Christmas, kiddo," so I didn't. I have thought about that moment more than almost any other in this whole story. I had every piece of the puzzle in my hand already. I just hadn't let myself lay them on the table yet. If you've ever watched somebody you love get smaller in a room full of people who are supposed to love them too, you already know the particular ache of that Christmas. You keep telling yourself you're imagining it. You are not imagining it. By late January, I couldn't shake it. I took 3 days off without telling anyone and drove down unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. Renee answered the door and recovered so fast I almost missed the flicker. "Oh, you just missed him. He's off with his buddies, some kind of fishing trip. Bad timing, sweetie. It was January, in Ohio. Nobody's ice fishing group met on a Tuesday, and Dad's actual fishing buddies, the ones from the vestio, hadn't been out since October. I drove to Larkspur Lane instead. The grass, dead as it was still shaggy from a fall that hadn't been mowed. The mailbox was stuffed past its hinge. The curtains were shut in the middle of the afternoon, a house holding its breath. On my way back through town, I ran into Wendell Pierce at the gas station. Dad's oldest friend, they'd served together, and Wendell still ran the VFU post out on Route 9. I asked, careless, whether Dad had made it to Tuesday breakfast lately. Wendell's face did something I won't forget. "Moses hasn't been to a meeting in 3 months, Amber." We figured he was still laid up from the hip. I called Renee from the gas station parking lot, and she didn't even pause. "Oh, no, it's not that group. It's his other buddies, from bowling. You wouldn't know them." A lie stacked so neatly on another lie it looked, for a second, almost like architecture. I drove home with a knot in my stomach. I couldn't trudge away. 3 days later, Renee sent a photo, proof of life, though I didn't have the word for it yet. Dad smiling thin in a chair I didn't recognize. Just relaxing today. The photo held that day's mood hostage for a week, because it was the only thing I had, and I made myself believe it. Then, 9 days after that, I got a call from a woman named Priya, a charge nurse I'd met at a conference 2 years earlier, who now worked at a long-term care facility called Brookhaven Manor, 45 minutes outside of town. She said my name carefully, like she was checking a chart before she committed to it. "Amber, there's a resident here who asks every nurse on every shift if they know somebody named Amber. Colston, is that your father?" Nobody had said the words nursing home to me. Not once. Not Renee, not Grant, not my father in any of our calls, because, I'd learned later, he hadn't been allowed to make any. "He doesn't present like a placement, Amber," Priya said, and that sentence has never left me. "He presents like somebody misplaced him." I got in my car. I didn't call Renee first. There are conversations you have on the phone, and there are conversations you have in person, in daylight, with paperwork on the table between you. I spent the whole drive doing what I do best, being a nurse instead of a daughter, because being a daughter right then would have put me in a ditch. Vitals, assessment, plan. Brookhaven Manor smelled the way these places always smell when they're understaffed, an undertow of bleach that never quite wins against what it's covering. Call lights blinked unanswered down a hallway with a television talking to a row of empty chairs. I counted, out of habit, out of horror, 1 aide for a wing that needed 4. My father was in a shared room with a window that didn't open, 15 pounds lighter than Christmas, wearing a flannel shirt I didn't recognize that fit him, like a borrowed apology. His first words to me were, "Took you long enough, kiddo." Then, quieter, the words that actually broke something in my chest. "They told me you knew, told me you signed off on it." We spent the next hour untangling 6 weeks of lies, and every knot had the same 2 sets of fingerprints on it, his phone taken to charge it properly. His mail will forward anything important. My letters, the ones I'd sent every week when the calls stopped connecting, never arrived and were never given to him. He'd kept in his wallet a torn corner of an envelope with my phone number written on it in his own hand, because it was the only copy of my number he still had access to. I ran him through it the way I would any patient with a question mark over their cognition, because I needed the answer for both of us. What's the date? Who's the president? Count backward from 100 by 7s. He got every single one right, dry as ever. "It's Tuesday," he said. "I'm in purgatory, and apparently purgatory doesn't take Diet Coke." Then he said the sentence that mattered most. "Whatever paper they used to put me in here, kiddo, I never signed a second one." I found the administrator and asked one question, flashing my license like a badge because it was the only leverage I had. "Does Mr. Colston have any diagnosis of cognitive impairment on file? Dementia, incapacity, anything?" Silence. Then a folder that produced nothing. My father discharged himself that afternoon, signing right-handed this time, hip-heeled enough to stand steady while he did it. "First thing I've signed in 6 months, he said, "and it's a jailbreak." We went straight to the bank. What the printout showed took the wind out of both of us. Thousands in care expense withdrawals for a man who'd been eating instant oatmeal in a shared room. Wire transfers to something called Larkspur Holdings, LC, which it turned out was Grant. Payments, plural, recurring, toward a credit card balance that traced straight back to Renee in Grant's own name. And underneath all of it, a home equity line of credit application on my father's paid-off house. Status, pending approval. Signature date, a Tuesday my father had spent sedated in a hallway at Brookhaven, 3 counties away from the notary stamp on the page. I called Renee that night. One call, one chance. I kept my voice as level as I'd keep it for a family in a waiting room. Tell me your side, I'm listening. You were never really in this family, Amber, she said. Don't you dare lecture the one who stayed. We hired an elder law attorney named Vivian Cross, 60s, reading glasses on a chain, a handshake like a filing cabinet closing, an office that smelled like toner and lemon drops. Documents don't cry, Mr. Colston, she told my father at our first meeting, not unkindly. That's why I like them. Within a week, she'd revoked every power of attorney, frozen the HELIC application cold, and filed both a fraud affidavit and an adult protective services report. Then she laid the forged document on the table. A second PO, full financial authority, a signature date that didn't match any calendar my father had lived through. She put it beside a photocopy of his Navy discharge papers from 1977. Side by side, even I could see it. The real one, the capital M in Colston leaning hard left like a man walking into wind. The forgery round, even, polite, every letter behaving itself. On this date, Vivian said, tapping the forgery, your father was at an orthopedic follow-up, sedated for a joint injection, signed in and out by 3 separate staff members between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. The notary stamp on this document says it was executed at 2:15. A man cannot be sedated in one county and signing his name in another. My father looked at that page a long time. Dead men don't sign papers, kiddo, he said finally, and I didn't understand yet what he meant by it. What he meant was this: he didn't want a quiet lawsuit in a beige courthouse hallway. He wanted the town, his whole town, the one that had watched Renee post grieving daughter photos for months, to see exactly what had been done, and by whom. They didn't just steal my savings, he told me, in his kitchen, the night he laid it out. Savings can be rebuilt. They stole my say, Amber. Told the whole town I needed storing. Told my own daughter I didn't want to see her. A man's say is the only thing he's actually got at the end of it. So he asked Wendell Pierce, Beeview Post commander, funeral honor guard for 3 decades, a man whose word on a death is gospel in 3 counties, to make one phone call. No obituary in any paper, no false report to any agency, no death certificate, no insurance claim, nothing that would ever touch a government form. Just a call, from a man everyone trusted, saying Moses Colston had passed quietly in his sleep. The trap wasn't legal. The trap was a mirror. Wendell made the call on a Thursday evening, my father and I both listening on speaker from the next room. My father's jaw tight the way it got when he was working hard not to feel something. Renee's first question, after Wendell's careful practiced condolence, the soft settling voice that had carried bad news up 1,000 front walks in his years running the funeral honor guard, was not, was he in pain, or where is he now? It was, was there anything with him? Papers, I mean. Did he leave anything behind? My father's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Just once, then it eased, some griefs a man absorbs standing up. Within the hour, Grant had called the mortgage lender to ask about expediting the pending HELOC given a change in family circumstances. Within 2 hours, Renee had posted a black and white photo of our father with the caption, "Rest easy, Daddy. Your girl was with you till the end." I looked at every proof of live photo she'd sent me over 6 weeks and understood, finally, they'd all been taken the same single afternoon. Stockpiled, rationed out to keep me calm. The next morning, a neighbor on Larkspur Lane called me, a van in the driveway, a man drilling the old locks out of the back door, before any funeral. Before, as far as they knew, we'd even buried him. That Saturday night, my father polished his good shoes at the kitchen table and hung his one dark suit on the closet door. Every man should look sharp at his own funeral, he said, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I heard something in his voice that sounded almost like joy. Sunday came clear and cold. 60 folding chairs in the VFU hall, flags along the back wall, an honor board with names going back to Korea. A closed casket, borrowed from a showroom 2 towns over, because nobody questions a closed casket, and because Vivian Cross had insisted dryly that an open one raises awkward questions before we're ready for them. My mother's favorite lilies on either side of it. Flowers she'd hated, actually, my father told me later with a small, private smile, because Renee had never once asked and had simply assumed. The whole town came. Renee arrived in a black dress with the tags freshly cut off and shoes that still had the box crease in them, tissue at the ready, crying precisely when she was observed and recovering the instant she wasn't. Grant worked the room in what I can only call his closer suit, gripping shoulders, accepting condolences like deposits into an account only he could see. Wendell stood at the front and at the appointed moment said, "Before we share our memories, the family has asked to say a few words about his affairs." Grant took the podium like he'd rehearsed it, which he had. He gripped both sides, bowed his head for effect, said something about how family honors a man's wishes even when it's hard, and then produced a folder. He read from it, smooth as a closing statement. "I leave everything to my daughter Renee, who cared for me faithfully to the end, and to my daughter Amber, I leave nothing, for reasons she knows." And then he smiled. That smile is the single most expensive thing that man has ever worn in his life. 60 folding chairs shifted at once, 60 spines straightening, a low murmur running the room like current through wire. Vivian Cross, seated near the back, unclasped her briefcase without any particular hurry. Wendell asked, conversational as anything, what date exactly that had been signed, and the side door clicked open. My father did not hurry. He has never hurried for anyone in his life, and he was not about to start walking into his own funeral. Dark suit, shoes like glass, steady on the hip that had started this whole thing 5 months earlier. Somewhere behind me a casserole dish slid off a folding table. Someone crossed themselves. From the back, one clean bark of laughter and an old neighbor's voice, delighted and horrified in equal measure. "Well, I'll be damned." Grant froze at the podium. The forged was still raised in one hand like an offering nobody wanted any more. My father walked to the microphone, adjusted it 2 inches with 2 fingers, the exact gesture he used every year giving the toast at the VO Christmas dinner, and looked at the casket beside him. "Nice box," he said, "little roomy for my taste." Then, to Grant, without raising his voice at all, "Dead men don't sign papers, son, and they surely don't drink coffee." Grant tried the only card he had left. "He's not competent," he said, louder than he meant to, voice cracking at the edges. "Look at him. This is elder confusion. He's been manipulated, probably by her. A hand thrown toward me like I was the diagnosis." Renee lunged for something softer. "You lied to me," she said, to Wendell, to the room, to anyone who'd hold the blame instead of her. "You called and said he was gone." And in that sentence, without meaning to, she told the whole room something none of them had noticed yet, that in 3 weeks of mourning she had never once asked to see the body. I walked up the center aisle with a folder against my chest, using the voice I keep for families in hospital waiting rooms, level and slow enough that nobody could accuse it of cruelty. "You were told he collapsed. You called me at 6:30 the next morning to tell me I was cut off. You never asked to see him, not once, Renee." Vivian Cross stood and buttoned her jacket like she was about to teach a class. "Mr. Whitfield," she said to Grant, using his actual last name for the first time all day, stripping the room of every ounce of warm syrup he poured into it, "may I see that document you just read aloud?" She laid the evidence out one piece at a time, the way you'd lay instruments on a tray before a procedure. The revocation of every power of attorney, filed and stamped. The medical records proving my father was sedated 45 minutes away at the exact hour this will claim to have been signed. The bank records with Larkspur Holdings, LC named in black and white. The HELOC application, dated to a day my father spent locked in a shared room he'd never agreed to occupy. The will itself, dated to a week, when Brookhaven's visitor log showed my father had received exactly 0 visitors. Then a man near the back row stood up on his own, a colleague of Grant's from the mortgage office, someone who'd notarized paperwork for him before. "You told me it was routine estate stuff," he said to Grant, in front of the whole room. "You said it was a formality." He unwitnessed himself right there, live, in front of 60 folding chairs, and I watched something in Grant's face finally understand that the room had turned. 2 sheriff's deputies came in through the same side door, exactly on the schedule Vivian had arranged with the county fraud unit 3 days earlier. Grant's mask went through every stage on its way down. Outrage, then charm. Then, at the very end, something close to begging. He turned to my father like blood was still worth something between them. "On family," he said. "I was going to pay it back. Every cent. It was an investment." My father looked at him for a long moment. "You had my checkbook for 5 months, son," he said. "The only thing you ever grew was my funeral." Renee broke last, and not with anything close to remorse. "We were drowning, Dad," she said. The condo, the cars, all of it. Grant said it was temporary, then turning on me because that's always where it turns, but you made it worse. If you'd just stayed out of it, nobody would have ever had to know. You called before sunrise to tell me I get nothing, I said. Renee, I'm the only one leaving this room with everything I walked in with. My father took the microphone back one last time and looked out at 60 faces that had known him 50 years. Folks, I apologize for the dry run, he said, but you needed to see it, not because I'm anything special, because next time it's your house, your kids, your papers. Check them while you're still above ground. Somewhere near the front, the pastor said Amen at a memorial for a man who was very much alive, and nobody in the room had the heart to laugh at how right that felt. In the parking lot, Grant was still explaining interest rates to a deputy who had stopped listening 2 sentences ago. Renee's new shoes caught on the gravel. That expensive click gone stumbling and arrhythmic, and at her car door she finally turned and looked at her father. The first time all day she'd looked at him instead of at what he had. He walked over, stopped an arm's length away, and gave her the line he'd been carrying on mute since 6:30 that morning 3 weeks earlier. You buried the wrong man, sweetheart. Then he looked at Grant and handed him back his own words from 6 months before, word for word. You were right about one thing. Somebody's finally out. That same evening, my father and I let ourselves into the house on Larkspur Lane with a locksmith of our own choosing, invoice and receipt, because, in this family, we keep records now. He walked straight past the boxes. Grant's people had already started pawing through, straight to the mantel, and wound my mother's clock before he'd even taken off his suit jacket. The tick started up again in that quiet house, and I swear the whole place seemed to exhale. I think, honestly, so did he. Here's the ledger, if you want the final numbers, because I know some of you will. Grant was charged with forgery, theft from an elderly person, and falsifying a loan application. His mortgage license was revoked, and Larkspur Holdings, LC, was dissolved by the state within the month. Restitution is still being paid, slower than any of us would like, but it's coming. The house was never touched. Vivian made sure of that before anyone else even knew it was in danger. My father has a living trust now, with me, and eventually, if things ever change, Renee as successor. Renee took a plea. Probation, restitution, community service assigned, with what I choose to believe was a little poetic justice on somebody's part, to a senior center 2 towns over. I went to see her once, at her probation office, not to gloat. I slid an envelope across the table with our mother's old letter in it, and one line my father had added at the bottom in his own hand. When the restitution's paid and the counseling's real, you know my address, it said. Until then, you get exactly what you offered me at 6:30 that morning. She read it and nodded, and it was, I think, the first honest transaction the 2 of us had had in years. My father started something afterward that I'm prouder of than almost anything else in this whole story. Informal talks at the VFU hall, teaching people how to read a power of attorney, how to spot a signature that's been dressed up to look like theirs, how to actually look at their own bank statement instead of trusting the word handled. 11 people came the first month. By the 3rd, Wendell was setting up extra folding chairs before anyone even asked. I took a permanent position closer to home. No more 40-minute distance, no more Sunday phone calls standing in for Sunday dinners. Now it's Sunday dinners, actual ones, my father burning the green beans on purpose because he swears I like them that way, which I don't and never have. But I've stopped correcting him because I understand now it's not really about the beans. He keeps something in his wallet now, tucked behind that torn envelope corner with my number on it, a press lily from a funeral that was never actually his. I asked him once why he kept it. Reminds me what almost got buried, he said. Wasn't me. If you've got an aging parent, I'm asking you gently to do something today. Ask them over coffee, not over a crisis. Who holds your power of attorney? Have you actually looked at your own bank statement this month, not the balance on the app, the real one? And if you've ever watched a smooth talker charm every room he walked into while quietly filing your family under assets, you already know exactly why my father needed more than a quiet lawsuit in a beige hallway. He needed the whole town to watch the mask come off. My father taught me, in the end, that the measure of a man was never the number sitting in his account. It's whether his say still stands while he's still breathing, and whether the people who claim to love him would rather guard his signature than inherit it. He's 72 now. He wins that clock every Sunday morning, same as he always has, same as my mother did before him. The tick came back, and so, I think, did he,